Okay, we're gonna talk about the sugya ben hashmashis a little bit, which is a difficult sugya and very technical. So we'll try to be as superficial as possible. L'chatchila. So something caught my eye a little bit ago. Vishnitz after the war split into two branches, right? There's Vishnitz Bnei Brak and Vishnitz Monsey. And when the Vishnitz Rebbe in Monsey was nifter, he had 8 sons, I think, and he made all of them Rebbes in different Vishnitz Monsey Kehilas. So the Vishnitz Monsey Williamsburg, the Monsey Vishnitz Rebbe of Williamsburg has a Kehila in Bloomingburg also. Bloomingburg is where some Satmars from Williamsburg moved, and I guess they go in tandem. So the Vishnitz Monsey Williamsburg has a Kehila in Bloomingburg also, and as they it's three places at once, and as they began to set up their community, a big fight started to develop because Satmar almost militantly adheres to Rabbeinu Tam in its purest form. Keeping Rabbeinu Tam after Shabbos means waiting until 72 minutes after Shabbos. Well, there's no exceptions, there's no workarounds, there's no angles. As opposed to Vishnitz Eretz Yisrael also, but Vishnitz Monsey does not keep 72 minutes. So you had in a very small Jewish Kehila in Bloomingburg, you'd have some people who are finishing Shabbos at 55 minutes after the Zman and getting into their car or smoking or on the phone, and you had the Satmaras who were still Shabbos for another 20 minutes, and it's kind of a Satmar town, and it led to a lot of fighting between these two groups in Bloomingburg. Eventually, they had meetings. The Rebbe of Vishnitz Monsey Williamsburg met the Satmar Rebbe of Williamsburg, and they came to an agreement where the Vishnitz Chassidim agreed to keep 72, like Avel Shofar, like 2 days Yom Tif in America. They agreed to keep 72. Anything public, they won't drive in a car. They won't anything public. They'll keep 72 to adhere to the community standards. Now, the idea of community standards, in these communities that are just, one group where they get built up, is a big thing that leads to, Kir Yisrael has been to the Supreme Court several times to defend their independence as a community, as a village. So it's in a secular way, and it's also in a halachic way, in a religious way, where you want to protect the identity of the Kehila that you built. A Kehila like, Kir Yisrael, Shikun Square, or Bloomingburg will be very fiercely, fighting to defend the character of the community. So now, I wanted to really turn it back a little bit and figure out where the 70. Let's just talk about where the Machlekes 72, the Ga'inim and Rabbeinu Tam, comes from, the original, how it comes to America, why Satmar takes it so seriously, and let's work through that. So the basic Machlekes, the two types of Zmanim starts as follows. We'll do it as simple as possible. There's a steer in the Gemara. There's a Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Lamed Daled that describes the Ben Hashmashis, which is from Shkia until Tzeis. Shkia, in the simplest context, would mean when the sun sets below the horizon. When one can no longer see the orb of the sun below the horizon, that's Shkia. And Tzeis, the Gemara in Shabbos says, is a short time after that. It's the amount of time it takes an irregular adult man to walk three quarters of a mil. Now, if a mil is 18 minutes, so 3/4 is 12 minutes. If a mil is 24 minutes, it's a different amount. There's many different sheets about a mil, but it's the amount of time that it takes to walk 3/4 of a mil. The Gemara in Pesachim is very similar. The Gemara in Pesachim says that the amount of time between Shkia, which we're going to assume means the same thing, the setting of the orb of the sun below the horizon, until Tzeis HaKechavim, is the amount of time it takes an adult man to walk 4 mil. Now, 4 mil at the calculation of 18 minutes is 72 minutes. So now we have a stira. There's two Gemaras. They both, the Man the Amar, and both of them is Rabbi Yehuda, that says these two shittas, and you have a stira. Now, Rabbeinu Tam, Afanart, in several places, Rabbeinu Tam and Taisus in Shabbos, Daf Lamed Daled, in Pesachim, Daf Tzadik Daled and Mud Aleph, and Sefer HaYashar 2 times. Rabbeinu Tam addresses the stira and says, what's going on? You have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. They're saying two very different things, two very different amount of times, describing seemingly the same set of circumstances, describing Shkia till Tzeis. So says Rabbeinu Tam, there are 2 Shkias, as Rabbeinu Tam says. Rabbeinu Tam describes Tzeis HaKechavim as follows. Rabbeinu Tam says, there's the first Shkia, when the sun sets past the line of the horizon, when you can no longer see the sun over the horizon, that's Shkia number 1. It says what happened then is the sun goes into the sky, but it's still creating a lot of light. It's still visible. It's still doing the job of the sun. It says then as it passes through the sky, and I'm quoting his words and you'll see why it's important, as it passes through the sky, till it gets to the other side of the sky. When it gets to the other side of the sky, then its light can no longer be seen anymore, and that's tzeis. That's when it's really dark. That's nighttime. Says Rabbeinu Tam, the last bit, as it passes through the other side of the sky and it's going to turn into complete darkness, there's a second Shkia, which starts 18 minutes before the final completion. So 18 minutes before 72 minutes is when Shkia, according to Rabbeinu Tam, is when Bein HaShmashos, according to Rabbeinu Tam is. Now, the way Rabbeinu Tam describes it is interesting. Rabbeinu Tam is describing the sun as when it goes out of view, what's happening is it moved into the sky. The sky is a certain amount of thickness, according to Rabbeinu Tam's description, and therefore it takes a certain amount of minutes for the sun to traverse the thickness of the sky, and only when it comes out on the other side is Seisek Chavim complete. When the sun is completely hidden away, behind the sky, is how Rabbeinu Tam is describing it. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because as follows. The Gemara in Pesachim and the Tzadik Daled Amud Beis brings a very, what's to us, modern people today, is a bizarre machlekes, where the Gemara brings a machlekes, Chachmei Umas Ha'olam and Chachmei Yisrael, what the sun does at night. Does the sun tuck behind the sky, or does the sun tuck under the earth? Is what the Gemara brings a machlekes. Now, there's many who try to describe this as the essential machlekes, if the earth is circling the sun or not circling the sun, and every one of these subtopics here has been tracing in Svarim that were put out on it. But the Gemara brings such a machlekes, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda is the man Amar there that says that the sun tucks into the sky, is how Rabbi Yehuda describes it. But the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam say no, the sun tucks into the ground. It tucks, beneath the horizon, not above the sky. And the Gemara says, the Chazru Chachmei Yisrael, the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam. The Chachamim realized that they were wrong, and that the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam had the correct picture of what goes on with the sun. And the raya the Gemara brings, and this is one raya, but there's many, is that well water is warmer at night than it is by day. So you see the sun is moving below the horizon, and it's warming up the well water. That's what the Gemara says. So now Rabbeinu Tam, if you read his words carefully, his description is very interdependent on Rabbi Yehuda's description in this other machlekes in Tzadik Beis and Tzadik Daled Amud Beis. If you understand that like Rabbi Yehuda, that the sun tucks into the sky, so then there's a thickness, there's a certain amount of width that's ascribed to the sky that the sun has to traverse. The Rabbeinu Tam describes, and during that time you can still see some sunlight until it fully goes away. But if you learn like Chachmei Umas Ha'olam that the sun tucks below the horizon, then Rabbeinu Tam's explanation to explain the stira of Rabbi Yehuda stops making so much sense. Now, this is something that many pointed out. This is not my chiddush. This is something that many pointed out. From the earliest people to bring down the machlekes, Rabbeinu Tam and the other Rishonim pointed out. The Maram al Shakar, who's from the earliest chuvas to talk about this machlekes, so he makes this point right away. He says Rabbeinu Tam is based on an outdated mode of calibrating, where the sun goes and how the sun sets at night, and therefore he says halacha is like the Goyim, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, others say as follows. If you look in Pesachim, Tzadik Daled Amud Beis, you'll see that when the Gemara says that v'chazru Umas Ha'olam, chazru Chachmei Yisrael to Umas Ha'olam, Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Gilyon HaShas brings down a Shita Mikubetzes from Ksubas Daf Gimel, where Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings down where the Shita Mikubetzes says in the name of Rabbeinu Tam that the Chachamim were chayzer to the Chachmei Umas Ha'olam was just token chazara, but they never really changed their mind. So the Satmar Rebbe used to say, Rabbeinu Tam l'shitasei, who held that the chazara was never a chazara, so he describes it the way he describes it. Okay, I'm just trying to say what the basic sheet of Rabbeinu Tam is. So just we have a stira. Let's just recap here for a second. We have a stira between two members of Yehuda. The member in Shabbos describes the shear between Shkia, which is when the sun sets below the earth, until Tzeitzei Chavim, as a time frame that only takes 18 minutes, as opposed to the Gemara in Pesachim, which describes it as something that takes 72 minutes. Now, and here lies the machlekes. Rabbeinu Tam says the one in the Gemara in Pesachim, that's the primary tzeis, and therefore, really, it's 72 minutes after the visible Shkia. 72 minutes after you see the sun disappear is when Shkia is. That's Rabbeinu Tam Shita. However, he learns the Gemara. However, he's dependent on Rabbi Yehuda, etc., etc. And then you have the Goinim Shita, which is the opposite. The Goinim Shita is that Shkia is when the sun sets below the earth, when you can no longer see it. Tzeis is 18 minutes after that, like the Gemara in Shabbos describes. That's the primary time frame of Shkia. And the Gemara in Pesachim that describes something that goes on for 72 minutes, that's a different type of tzeis that is not visibly discernible with the eyes, and it refers to a different din. That's how the Goinim learn it. Now, these are the two basic positions, let's say, between the Goinim and Rabbeinu Tam and how to learn Shkia. Now, so what did Klal Yisrael do? Who holds like what? Meaning, we're quoting just the Goinim and Rabbeinu Tam. What was the minig in Klal Yisrael? What did most Paiskim hold like? What did most Rishonim hold like? So it's very hard to find a sefer on this topic that's not agenda-driven. Almost anybody who writes a sefer on this topic strongly favors one position over the other, and will be just incessantly building up one side. So you really have to you try to find an agenda on each side. But let's just frame it like this: the Gaonim, the Maram al-Shakar quotes a tshuva from Reb Nahiroi Gaon. That's the first person to quote that tshuva. We don't have that tshuva ourselves. The Maram al-Shakar quotes that tshuva, and in there the Gaonim say that they hold Shkia is only 18 minutes. Tzeis is only 18 minutes after the visible Shkia, and fine. So we know what the meaning of the Gaonim was, l'chayra. We know that the Gaonim didn't keep Rabbeinu Tam. The Gaonim probably kept the Gaonim's man, because Rabbeinu Tam wasn't around anymore. Wasn't around yet. I'm sorry. Now, the Mishnah Berurah, the Rabbeinu Tam comes and he's Mechadish Shita, and signing on with the Rabbeinu Tam is really a tremendous amount of Rishonim, really, really heavy hitting Rishonim. We'll see in a second. But just before we say that, I just want to tell you who holds like the Gaonim also. A small list of names: the Baal Halachas Gdolos, Rav Sadi Gaon, Rav Nissen Gaon. Who else? Rabbeinu Chananel, Rashi, the Rif, the Rambam, the Riazaken, who's younger than Rabbeinu Tam, the Ravid, Rabbeinu Yoina, the Rami Rottenberg, the Haggayis Maimonides, many Gedolei Rishonim, great men held like the Gaonim. The Gaonim is not at all a day Yechidah. The Gaonim is a shita that many Rishonim held like. Amongst them, some of the most primary Rishonim that we have: Rashi, the Rambam, etc. Now comes along Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, we already explained how Rabbeinu Tam gets to his shita. Comes along Rabbeinu Tam and he says his position, which ranges anywhere between 72 minutes to 96 minutes, depending on how you calculate a mill. And I'm sure everyone knows of people who keep 90 minutes, who keep longer, all those different shitas. Now, many Rishonim hold like Rabbeinu Tam as well. A short list, for example: the Itur, the Rash Mishantz, the Ravya, the Rekeach, the Smag, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Yerucham, the Rashba, the Ramban, the Ritva, the Ran, and Mukhe Yosef. Many brand name Rishonim hold like Rabbeinu Tam. So it's a heavily weighted machlekes on both sides. And because of this, the Bir Halacha in Siman Reish Samach Aleph, when the Shulchan Aruch talks about Ben Hashmashis, the Bir Halacha felt the need to reiterate that even though at his time Rabbeinu Tam was the more dominant opinion, the Bir Halacha is the one who compiles a lot of this list to show that the Gaonim is a serious shita. Now, Yiach Shiyah, clearly Rabbeinu Tam's position found favor amongst a tremendous amount of the Rishonim, and it became what we would think should be the widely accepted minig in Klal Yisrael, to the point where the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Samach Aleph, the Mechaber, paskins like Rabbeinu Tam. That's how he describes, Tzeis like Rabbeinu Tam, and the Ramah has no critique. The Ramah seems to agree. Now, the problem is that if you look at different minhagim svarim from that tkufa, from the tkufa of the Mechaber and from the tkufa of the Rishonim, you'll see that the minig in Klal Yisrael was still like the Gaonim. Although Rabbeinu Tam and most of these Rishonim, were machadish this position already, that Tzeis is much longer, and really this leads to a huge kula, right? Because this means on Erev Shabbos, Shkia could come at 7 o'clock, and you could be doing Malacha until 8:15 Kamat, right? So it leads to a huge kula. It seems that most people were adhering to the Gaonim still. The Maril and other minig svarim all seem to go with the Gaonim shita. Ad kedei kach that one of the strangest things here is that in the Sephardic world, although generally speaking they paskin, with the Mechaber on every topic, did not and does not hold like Rabbeinu Tam. The Sephardic world does not keep Shabbos until 72 minutes, and they won't do Malacha past when the Gaonim allow to do Malacha. So it seems that even in the Beis Yosef's own Kehillah, his own community, the Hanhaga of Rabbeinu Tam's Psak was not the popular Hanhaga. So now, in let's say in Germany, we have different svarim that show us that it seems extensive that the Hanhaga was not like that. So now, when did it begin to catch on? So the Bach, the Magen Avram, the Gedolei Achronim in the next few generations after the Shulchan Aruch, they passed like Rabbeinu Tam, and that's when it began to catch on. The Magen Avram was a big paisik for Klal Yisrael, and especially in the Chassidish Welt. Once the Chassidim came on the scene, the Magen Avram is the dominant paisik, and that became very prevalent in Klal Yisrael. Now, so it's interesting to note that if you're mapping it out in hundreds of years, you'd say Klal Yisrael for maybe, call it 1,500 years did the Gaonim. Then for about 400 years or 350 years, Rabbeinu Tam became the primary one, or even less, maybe 250 years, and then enters onto the scene the Gaon. Now the Goyin in Bir Agra, in two places, and in some of his other Svarim, Mishnais Eliyahu, and another Sefer, has long marachas, out of character marachas to argue in Rebbeinu Tam, and strongly agree with the Goyinim. The Goyin holds like the Goyinim extremely, to the point where the Shita became known as the Goyin's Shita. Incidentally, the Balatanya, in the back of his Siddur, has a section called Siddur Shel Shabbos, where he also strongly agrees with the Goyinim and disagrees with the Rebbeinu Tam. So that Rebbeinu Tam enjoyed that position of being the dominant psak in Klal Yisrael from the Magen Avram's time till the Goyin's time. It's a short window. It's about 250 years, call it. That Rebbeinu Tam enjoyed that position of being the dominant psak in regard to the Zmanim, until the Goyin and the Balatanya and others, the Shach, for example, disagrees, come back on the scene and begin to, again, very strongly push the Goyinim Shita, to the point where by the time World War I rolled around, the minig was basically as follows. In Lita and those Kehilas, Russia, Lita, like that, Ukraine, there was many people who kept the Goyinim Zicher on Erev Shabbos. They were Machmer. They'd call you Mechal Shabbos if you did Malacha past the Shki of the Goyinim. In regards to keeping it a Moitzi Shabbos, so Machmirim kept Rebbeinu Tam, to be Machmer, but plenty of people didn't. They kept the Goyinim. If you moved over to the Chassidische Welt, to Galicia and to even Poland and other parts, main Poland and other parts of the Chassidische Welt, there Rebbeinu Tam became the dominant Shita, to the point where even people would obviously not daven Mincha until a long time after Shkia. On Shabbos, certainly Malachas D'Rabbanan, maybe even Malachas D'Oraisa, until a long time after Shkia. A child who's born, an hour after Shkia would still have a bris on Shabbos next week, etc. And on the way out, obviously, again, they kept Rebbeinu Tam l'chumrah. That was the situation in Europe, before the war, as it broke down. Now, there's one more nakuda I just want to link to before we move on to America. There's one more nakuda. I'm sorry, it's a lot of nitty-gritty details. There's one more nakuda. There's a machlekes. This is called the Minchas Kayin Shita, but it's really not exclusively the Minchas Kayin. It's many Gedolei Achronim, and there are some more chelik. And the Minchas Kayin believes that even though Rebbeinu Tam describes his Shita as what we would calibrate as 72 minutes, he's really describing a certain amount of darkness, where in the place that he learned the Gemara to be describing, he felt it took that amount of time to achieve that level of darkness. But in other locations across the globe, not where the Gemara was talking about, mimicking that level of darkness would take less time. And therefore you could have Rebbeinu Tam Shita really being 50 minutes, or 45 minutes, or 55 minutes. Rebbeinu Tam Shita does not exclusively have to be 72 minutes, according to the Minchas Kayin, to simplify it. One of the great piece of detective work that I came across, I think this is very interesting, there's a tshuva in the Chasam Sofer, Archaim Tshuva Pei. The Chasam Sofer gets a shayla about a bris, and the Chasam Sofer, it's written in 1813 in Matastarf, is when the Chasam Sofer is writing this tshuva. The day is Hey Tammuz, or Daled Tammuz. Daled Tammuz, 1813, Matastarf. The Chasam Sofer writes that Chasam Sofer writes about the machlokes. He says, I hold like Rebbeinu Tam. This baby was born at I forgot what time, but the Chasam Sofer writes that Shkia Tseis B'Mkaimenu 72, Rebbeinu Tam's man B'Mkaimenu today is 8:55. That's what Rebbeinu Tam writes. So someone went back and they did a calendar search and they found out that Shkia, when the sun dips below when the orb of the sun dips below the horizon on Daled Tammuz 1813 in Matastarf, was 8:03, was Shkia. So Kumtai said the Chasam Sofer, who's strongly saying that he's following Rebbeinu Tam's man, is having a Rebbeinu Tam's man that consisted of 52 minutes. To get to 8:55 is 52 minutes. So Rebbeinu Tam is having his man of 52 minutes and calling that Rebbeinu. The Chasam Sofer is having his man of 52 minutes and calling that Rebbeinu Tam. So clearly you see the Chasam Sofer, although he never explicitly says that he holds like the Minchas Kayin, held like the Minchas Kayin, that Rebbeinu Tam does not have to be exclusively 72. Okay, so now let's move to America. Okay, so now in America, like we spoke in the first few parts of this series, the people who came here were non-Hasidim. By and large, generally speaking, the early immigrants to America were non-Hasidim. They weren't so frum. But the ones who were frum were also non-Hasidim, and the minig that developed in America, that seems to develop in America, was to keep the Shittas HaGa'inim. The minig was in America that they kept Shittas HaGa'inim. They didn't do Rebbeinu Tam. They were makbid on Erev Shabbos, not to do Malacha any time after the Ga'inim's Tzeis, which is only 18 minutes, right away. And they also, on Mighty Shabbos, they would do Malacha, maybe 18 or 24, or it's hard to know exactly what the Shita was, but 18, 24, maybe 30 minutes after Tzeis, after Shkia on Mighty Shabbos, they'd be doing Malacha already. Now, this is something we see in different early Svarim. I want to read you a tshuva. There's a tshuva from the Beis Avi as follows. He says, Achin l'maisa nira, kivin d'gdolei harabanim ba'artzis habris. Harishonim, the first ones who arrived, the Gedolei Rabbanim who arrived here to America, Hayum Yotzei Lita, Shepasku Kagra, they were from Yotzei Lita who paskin like the Gra, She'achriya Keshitas HaGainim, who in turn paskin like the Gainim, B'Shabbos Chmir Yotzei Mizeh Keshitas HaYireim, they lit candles a little earlier, V'chein Nunoigim B'Zeh. He says, therefore, in America, he's handling a child who's born, Erev Shabbos, some sort of Ben Hashmashes. He says the minig is to do like the Gainim in America. That's what the Tshuva Beis Avi, even the Spinka, the Pupadayan in Shut Vayan Yosef, the first Pupadayan to land on these shores, writes that he says, B'boyi lekan la America, when I arrived here, Noida lanu, the poi naktu bali hara shitas hagra, the poiskin kagainim. Over here, the minig is that they do like the gra, which is shitas hagainim, the mishkia sachama ve'elach have ben hashmashes. Al-kain, gamlin in hafsik taira, gamani poiskin, the ma'akav she'ekad mishkia sachama. Says the Pupadayan, that even though he's Chassidish, he's clearly Chassidish, the din in America is that the minig is to do the Gainim, lahakal and lahachmer. That's and we find this in a few more svarim. Rav Henkin held like this, and elsewhere you'll find this is the minig. Now comes the Satmar Rebbe after the war, and he has a very different take. So now I just want to, before I read what he has to say about Tzeis and 72 minutes, I just want to read you in a tshuva that's about mechitzas, which is a famous tshuva on its own, and probably worth going through. His machlekes of the Moshe about mechitzas. In there, in the middle, he says as follows. And this is like a cornerstone for how he goes forward from here. He says as follows. Hine vadai sheba America ein shum minig. There's no such a thing as a minig of America. Ki ein nikr minig elamash nesyasid b'makom gedolei Torah v'yira. The only minig that counts, that's called a minig, is something that's established when there's gedolei Torah v'yira. There's a upstanding kahila with rabbanim and gedolei Torah. That's a minig that counts. Lo minhagi bayris kinaydu b'chal hapaiskim. Not stam what Amaratzim do. He says, a minig America, that's just Amaratzim. That's not a minig. He says, he continues, he brings many sources like this. He says, okay, then he continues, but point is that's the punchline there. The Satmar Rebbe says, a minig in America is to be disregarded. There's no such a thing. A minig in America is Amaratzim. So comes the Satmar Rebbe, and in the early 1950s, he begins to make a huge push to have the tzibur revert back to Rabbeinu Tamzman. Revert back to Rabbeinu Tamzman and start keeping Rabbeinu Tamzman, which in the Satmar Rebbe Shita was both chumras. It was A Rabbeinu Tam as opposed to the Gainim, and B Rabbeinu Tam, pure Rabbeinu Tam, 72 minutes as opposed to the Minchas Kayan's, kulas. So says the Satmar Rebbe in Shut Divrei Yoel and Tshuva Yud Ches that. He says, it's a very short tshuva, and short tshuvas are usually a sign of something that doesn't need to be proven too much. There's not much work to be done. It's a simple matter. He says, Zeu shitas Rav Rishayim, v'chein pasuk ha-Shulchan Aruch, v'neisei kelev, kedasa ben etam. This is the shita of the Rav Minyan of Rishayim. It's the Shulchan Aruch. It's the neisei kelev, the Ramaz nach chaylik, kemavor ba'arichos, b'sefer minchas kayin, v'chein das Rav gedolei achreinim. Most people hold like this. It's a yasid, and the psak of the Shulchan Aruch is ki yasid ba'al tamut. It's a thing we can't move from, and Memela, it's pasha to me that we have to go back to keeping Rabbeinu Tam in all its glory in America, and that's it. Now, he didn't rest at that. In 1956, the Satmar Rebbe gathered together a group of 50 Rabbanim at a meeting in Williamsburg, and they paskined, and half of the zettel's in Yiddish. I printed it out. It's actually in the Igros Divrei Yoel. They have the original Maidah that he printed out. In there, it says as follows: Maidah Rabba Leiraisa, the Vada Sifas Arabanim Sheskayma Or Leyoim Dalid say the Tyre Dalid Disim Tafshin Yudalid, 1954. Ladum Bidvar Pirza Shmir Shabbos Kodesh, to be done in the great Pirza and Shmir Shabbos Kodesh that we find over here in America. Hainu Zman Hadlak is Neres V'Erev Shabbos Kodesh, V'Zman Hetam Malacha B'Mitzi Shabbos. Achar Shenasov V'Nasnu B'Davar B'Pilpul Halacha. After we discussed this and we went through the Inyan B'Pilpul Halacha, Bo'oli de Maskana, we the undersigned came to a conclusion. V'Hechled Gemura Upsak Halacha Al Pi Chavas Daitenu Al Pi Das Teresenu HaKadesha. Ashezman. Now, just want to point that over here. Now, here's going to be the concession. In order to establish Rabbeinu Tam in America, the Satmar Rebbe makes a concession, which I guess we're all very familiar with. He says, "This man had lakas neiris by America. Yeh reva shah kaidem shkia sachama should be 15 minutes before shkia. This is the regular visible shkia. Before shkia, as we know it, kaidem shkia sachama shal yom erev Shabbos kodesh. This man had the malach of Motzei Shabbos kodesh. Yeh 72 minutes mizman hashkia shal Motzei Shabbos kodesh L'zeh banu, and they sign, and every somebody, every Chassidish somebody in Williamsburg signs on to this. At that time, that included even the Bavur Rebbe, and the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, the Skver Rebbe, not Skver actually, I'm sorry, and Krasner, etc. It's a list of 50 names. The Berach Moshe signed on it, etc. Now the concession here is that in order to achieve like a unified Shabbos program that could include 72, is these Rabbanim all signed on and agreed that on the way into Shabbos, the Shkia that should be adhered to is the Ga'inim Shita. Meaning, don't allow people to keep Rabbeinu Tam in its full glory. You have Rabbeinu Tam 72 minutes into Shabbos and 72 minutes out of Shabbos. That's going to make like Kishtei Teiris. You can have people keeping Shabbos now, not keeping Shabbos later. You can have other people who don't keep Shabbos then, but keep Shabbos then. So in order to achieve like the perfect mezeg, so there's a concession over here also, meaning in order to achieve Rabbeinu Tam in America, the Satmar Rebbe also increased Shabbos on the way in. So what we have over here is that it became... Now, it's hard to say, I don't know, everyone could have their own opinion, but I don't think that one could say the Minig America became to keep 72. I mean, certainly many people don't keep 72. I think in Lakewood it's more prevalent to keep 72 than in other places, and that's because Reb Aaron also held, like the Satmar Rebbe, that 72 is important. But I think it's hard to say the Minig in America is to keep 72, but it certainly increased the awareness of the existence of the 72 minutes and made it a much more stronger Shita. Now, if you'll notice, I slipped in that on this settle, the Vizhnitzer Rebbe signed. The Vizhnitzer Rebbe of Monsey signed. So Vestmer Fregen, back to Bloomingburg, what are we fighting about? It seems like the Vizhnitzer Rebbe signed on this settle together with the Satmar Rebbe, and it doesn't seem, they don't seem to be upholding their end of the bargain. So the Vizhnitzer Rebbe in a speech that he gave in 1990 to his Hasidim addressed this, and he said that out of kavod for the Satmar Rebbe, everyone who was there signed on, but amongst us, there were many who Taka didn't agree to this psak, and we agreed, to adhere to a certain degree, but not to really feel like this in our kehilas. Not to feel like this in our kehilas. So to the point that in America, even amongst the Chassidish Welt, Chabad, Ger, Vizhnitz, Stalin, Bian, Uchadayme, Vizhnitz, I said Vizhnitz, do not keep 72. So even though a lot of representatives from these different kehilas did sign on to this Kol Kair in 1954 to agree with the Satmar Rebbe, it was more like a...
keep to the first half year.
Who? The Satmars. Yeah. So officially they do. Officially the Rabbanim always speak, and if you look, I have a sefer over here, Yisrael Vazmanim from Yisrael David Hofernes, he's a big Satmar Paisik. He very strongly is into the fact that it's a chayrim and...
Kids born a half hour after Shkia don't make
besides for brisim. Except for a bris. Besides for a bris, because there, Yekilu tugged in both directions, because you have the Vayem Hashmini, the Chshivas are doing a bris Bizmanai, and you have, the Shabbos, so there they'll do it. But otherwise, the official stance is that even the Rabbanans, one's not supposed to violate once Shkia starts. The problem is that if you're not going to daven mincha, if you do the math, if you're lighting candles 15 minutes, the women are lighting candles 15 minutes before Shkia, and you're not going to daven mincha until, call it, an hour after Shkia. You have too much time to kill. It's not really possible to be keeping Shabbos. You have an hour and 15, an hour and 20, hour and a half of nothing to do. So certainly, no one really upheld their full end of the bargain on this Kol Kaira. Many other Chassidish Shekhilas splintered off and do not keep 72. And Satmar... They hold, so 1 second. So they all seem to hold a variant of the Minchas Kayin. Then no one's trying to say Ga'inim in its purest sense. Even in Eretz Yisrael, where the Ga'inim, we really pass them like the Ga'inim. In Eretz Yisrael, you can't find the person. It gets dark much quicker, that's true. But you can't find the person come out in Eretz Yisrael to keep 72. So they don't keep 18 minutes though. Rabbi Yashiv said 25 minutes, others said other times, but yeah, it's all a version. So that's just so what do they do? So I just wanted to read from a tshuva of Reb Moshe. Reb Moshe is not the tzad shekeneged over here. Reb Moshe Negus Moshe in Chelik Dalet tshuva Samach, I can't find it here, it's lost in the pile, but Chelik Dalet Simon Samach, Reb Moshe holds that in America, he describes it a little different than the Satmar Rebbe. He also seems to agree with the Satmar Rebbe's position that in America it doesn't pass to say there's a minig America. Reb Moshe also arrived here after the first wave, when there was already some sort of minig. Reb Moshe also doesn't feel bound to that minig. It's not a minig that was established by Talmidei Chachamim. He's not bound to that minig. Reb Moshe says that America is a melting pot. It's comprised of people who come from all sorts of kehilas. He says the minig America is to make sure that every kehila is not violating their Shabbos. So Reb Moshe says it's pashatim that you have to make Shabbos like the Ga'inim right away. On the way out, you have to keep Rabbeinu Tam. He says, Kol Yirei Shemayim, Kol Ben Torah should keep Rabbeinu Tam. The only difference is that Reb Moshe's Rabbeinu Tam in America is only 50 minutes. Reb Moshe does his version of the Minchas Kayin in America, where he calculates in a time in America is only 50 minutes. So Reb Moshe wants, again, some sort of shila between the two of them. Now,
where did Tzigdi come from?
I don't know, I'm not sure.
No,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we're leaving off. It's a very confusing sugi. It's very, very detailed.
I think Reb Aaron held Ladino.
72. Yeah, Reb Aaron was Reb 72. Yeah, Reb Aaron held Ladino 72. Yeah, Reb Aaron held strongly that. B'chalev and Shia, I'll just say that the Satmar Rebbe is clearly focused on increasing Shmir Shabbos and being Machzor Atar Liyashna of Shmir Shabbos, how it was kept back home in America. And this was a push and another bump to get the American Shabbos back on the road. And whether or not it was fully successful or not fully successful, it certainly was Machzor Atar Liyashna in a certain sense. And today, everyone kind of has a balance of both of these things. And it was a contributor to bringing Shabbos back in America. It just, to me, the interesting nakuda to note over here is like, when you look at the arc of time over here, like, we're living in a moment now where the psak is, let's say, a shiluv between Ga'onim and Rabbeinu Tam. But who knows how long that psak lasts for, and someone in 200 years will look back and say, yeah, there was this short window in time when Klal Yisrael was keeping like a little bit of both. Now, so it's just like, it's always interesting to look at that arc in regards to this psak, in regards to a lot of psakim. Okay, we're going to take a break now for the summer. We'll reconvene in El.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.